Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Moore, and I'm a lead recruiter here at Google, and wanted to welcome you all to our second Google Hangout on Air to talk about technical interviews and give you guys a chance to engage a little bit and hear what some Google engineers have to say about technical interviews. And so to start things off, I'd like to just introduce Rachel and Eddie. I'll give you guys just a quick second to introduce yourself. Rachel, why don't you go first, and then we'll start jumping into some of the content.
Sure. So I'm Rachel, and I'm an engineer on the Chrome team. I work on front-end features for that. And I've been at Google for about 3.5 years, I think now, and doing interviews almost as long. Anything else?
Okay.
That's great.
Well, my name's Eddie. I am an engineer on the Google Platforms team. Specifically, I do data center software development. Mostly a lot of back-end work dealing with our data center infrastructures. And in a strange coincidence that Rachel and I were actually in the same interview training, and she was the sample interviewee and I was the sample interviewer. So it just kind of magically worked out this way.
And you both got hired. Amazing. Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, what I was hoping we could talk about is, back in the fall we did a blog series, and one of the things we talked about was, preparing for a technical interview. And there were a few things that I really harped on, and harped on is probably not the right description, but I really focused on, having candidates, do their homework, going back through, brushing up on what they've done, looking out, finding sample questions on things that they might hear, really making sure they know what's coming and be as prepared as they possibly can. And then also, looks like we lost Rachel. I'm sure we can get her back. Then also go and basically go back and brush up on your algorithms and sort of your core CS stuff like that. And one of the examples I put out there, Eddie, is the MIT opens OpenCourseWare, which basically allows people to take free courses from MIT. And I'm not saying you need to go take a free course in MIT, but give you the option to go back and take that basic algorithms course to brush up. And then the one that I sort of laugh at the most is to basically know your resume, right? Don't put on your resume that you're an expert in Java and doing X, Y, and Z and walk into this technical interview and have someone go, hey, Java, well, talk to me about this and that, and find yourself starting your interview on your heels from the get-go. And so those were sort of my quick things. I joke around on the blog, sort of rinse and repeat until you get desired results. But would love to hear just a quick few thoughts on what you look for and how you would prepare for a technical interview, and I'll re-invite Rachel while you're talking.
Okay. Well, just a little background on my interview experience. I've interviewed approximately 120 candidates at this point, and I've had a lot of experience dealing with university students. I've done recruiting at Purdue University, University of Texas, Carnegie Mellon. So I've seen a lot of these student candidates. A typical interview with me and pretty much any other Google engineer is going to be very different from what you probably read about in, let's say, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. That they always post these trivia questions about, oh, you drop an egg off a building and how high can you drop it from, or how do you get out of a blender or whatever. And the thing is that we haven't been asking those since I've been here. And in fact, the hiring committee knows that we shouldn't be asking those. So even if you got asked one, it's not even the end of the world, right? That they're just going to disregard the question. But a typical interview with me is going to cover three facets: coding, algorithms, and system design. And the thing is that I expect you to be good at all of them. You don't have to be a superstar in all of them, but I expect you to be able to do, each of these areas. I don't care about your language choice, but whichever one you do choose, I expect you to be familiar with it. That you chose this language because you're comfortable with it. So if you say you're going to do it in Java, then it should be proper Java syntax. It shouldn't be Java with a little bit of Python mixed in, like, oh, there's this other thing that you can do but only applies to C++ or something. And that's a mistake that actually happens a surprising number of times. And in general, though, I try to make all my coding questions easy enough that you could solve it in C without library. That you're somewhat limited on what you can ask in an interview because of the format. You have a short period of time to meet with someone, and you want to make sure that you can learn a lot about them, you want to have conversations, and you want to deal with the simple coding question, but also be able to get into some more complicated algorithms, and you can't implement complicated algorithms in an interview. I mean, like trying to figure out how to do different types of graph algorithms, for example, and you can't code that up in an interview. I think you can do that in an interview. But in general, I mean, I want you to succeed in an interview. So don't think that we're out to get you when you're doing this. We definitely want to have talented coworkers, and we definitely want people who are capable of conversing freely about a lot of these issues. So we are on your side, please. We desperately
cool.
So did you want me to go more, or?
Well, I was going to ask you. It's sort of a maybe a bit of a tangent question, but while we wait for Rachel, I was thinking, how do you? And I know we've gotten some questions off the moderator page too. When you run into a candidate in an interview, excuse me, I've had too much coffee today, and they struggle or they get stuck. I always counsel candidates, communicate, yes. Communicate. Would love sort of, just your thoughts as it's one thing for the recruiter to say it. It's a very different thing for the actual engineer who's interviewing the person to say it. So I'd love just your thoughts on that.
Well, honestly, I expect some back and forth in an interview. That generally speaking, actually the other notes I had here is that the worst candidates in terms of scoring and performance are the ones who don't talk through the problems. Because what will often happen is they'll misunderstand the question or they'll get stuck, and then they just stare blankly at a whiteboard or whatever. And then when they do this, I mean, I can't help because I don't know where they're at. I mean, I'd like to, oftentimes, just if you get stuck, just say, I'm stuck. I don't know what I'm doing. Or I think that it could be this. Start with a simple solution and then optimize up to a better solution. That you want to keep making some progress, and if you get stuck, that's fine. Quite frankly, a lot of my more complicated questions, I don't expect you to get an optimal solution for it. I expect to have a nice conversation about the relative benefits and disadvantages of different solutions to the problem. So it's okay to get stuck, and it's okay to just say that you're stuck, but just talk about what you're thinking and why you're stuck. It's a perfectly valid way of handling an interview, and most candidates do this, even successful candidates.
Right, absolutely. I think Rachel's having some technical difficulties. We'll keep going. You and I can do this.
Okay, sounds
fun. One of the questions that we get is, what do the, and this is from Jason in Singapore, what do interviews really look for when they're conducting an interview? And I know we talked a little bit about, the high-level coding design algorithms, but is there sort of like the one thing that makes you go, that's right, that's what I was looking for?
Well, it's tough to say because honestly, from my perspective, I want a complete candidate. There's no one thing I'm looking for. That there are often conversations we'll see on Hacker News, for example, talking about I'm looking for a ninja in SQL, or I'm looking for a design guru or something. We want to have people who are generalists, so I expect people to be conversant in a variety of topics. Now, I certainly appreciate it when someone's an expert in a given area. It's kind of we're having all kinds of problems with Rachel there, aren't we? But basically, my PhD advisor, I think, probably said it the best. It's that a great engineer is someone who knows a little about a lot and a lot about a little. So that's pretty much what I'm going for. The three areas that I do look for are coding, algorithms, and system design, and they do need to be able to be competent in all three.
Right.
So, but the big mistake that I think a lot of people make is they're very insular. That's probably the best thing I can say, that the things that don't work well, are candidates who are very quiet, who aren't good at conveying technical concepts clearly, because what will often happen is that because they can't convey the concept clearly, I misunderstand what it is they're going for, and we can sometimes go off on tangents that are the wrong way for the problem. We can go that they can get stuck and I can't give them the hint, or can get unstuck, that sort of thing.
Cool. So we have a question from Waterloo, Canada, from Arthur up in Waterloo. It's actually really funny. I support our Waterloo office, and when I grabbed my T-shirt this morning, and I know we were talking our T-shirt show off earlier. If you want to go show yours off, Eddie, I know Razorback pride.
I'm the only Razorback in engineering that I can find.
But I was trying to decide between a sort of standard Google T-shirt, and I'll just sort of throw mine out there, and a Waterloo T-shirt. So Arthur in Waterloo, I apologize for not wearing my Waterloo T-shirt. But your question, Arthur, is can you tell? Is there a way to tell when you're ready for a technical interview at Google? Now, I have some opinions.
Well, what's your opinion on this? Because I have my opinion on it as well.
I kind of feel like if you've done your prep right and you go out and you look at, sites like Top Coder or, different competitions and things like CodeJam and, all of these different things that are out there for sort of coding and, software, I don't know, competency, I guess is what I'm looking for, so that, when you're really comfortable in that kind of an environment, it's not going to be a one-to-one perfect match, but you're going to have a gut feel into how you're feeling about the interview.
Okay.
Hi, Rachel. We've been doing a really good job not teasing you while you've been having technical difficulties. We'll make up for it by teasing you now live.
So the question that we're answering is what would be a good way to tell if you're ready for the technical interview at Google? Jeff just gave his response. And I have to agree with Jeff on this, that I feel like you're ready for a technical interview when you feel comfortable in your knowledge of computer science and engineering. I think that there's a lot of timidity associated with it, that people are afraid of the process, which I guess goes into one of the future questions, that quite frankly the process at Google is not that different from other places. That it's a fairly typical process that software engineers go through throughout the entire community. So, I mean, I would be no more afraid of applying for a job here if you feel comfortable with it than any other place.
Well, I would agree with that for the most part. For me, it's kind of like an exam almost. I mean, when you were in college, when did you feel ready for an exam? And, I mean, there's always something more you can study. There's always something more you can read about. But at some point, you got to say, all right, I'm confident with what I know, and go in there and give the best you got.
Right. Hey, Rachel, just to sort of chime back to when we lost you the first time, so I told you I'd pick on you. Is there anything that you sort of look for in an interview when you're doing an interview, a technical interview with someone? Is there stuff that sort of jumps off the page as sort of like, this is what I really was looking for today, that you've got a great candidate in the room with you? It's a hard question.
It is a hard question. So one of the things I definitely look for, so I guess I tend to take a lot, in addition to looking for technical skills, I'm also looking at how they handle the situation, because there are situations that we have at work where, you're working on a problem with other people. And so one of the things that I look for is how relaxed are they? Are they going in there, are they freaking out the entire time, or is, this just, coding up something, answering a technical question, is that something that is, commonplace for them, so they're okay with it? When I'm doing the technical, another thing I'm looking for is the way they're thinking about things. So even if they have, and tell me if I'm going off topic, but even if they... Okay. Even if they have no idea what the answer to the problem is, I want to know where their thinking is going. I want to know what thought processes they're having. So I'm looking for somebody who's going to tell me that as well. And I can get into that more when we talk about details of that. But basically, I'm looking for someone, for the way someone thinks, and I'm looking for someone who's not going to stress me out with their stress.
Yeah, I also, just to sort of pile onto that comment, one thing that I hear a lot from candidates and from people doing interviews is they really, the interview is sort of, simulating the work environment, right? And so when you ask, the question is something to the effect of, could you do that faster? Could you do that better? And the candidate's like, no, you couldn't do that faster. And then the, other person chimes in with, and now I'm going to totally expose myself as not being that technical, but, says, oh, you could do that, OLOG or whatever, so whatever the complexity thing is, you guys can both laugh at me now. That kind of back and forth communication is really key to the interview and really is a big part of a good interview. Because we're both just nodding in agreement.
Oh, yes, I can verbalize that. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing. I mean, I also would agree with that. I mean, part of what I was talking about with my response is that you want to talk, don't just be silent. And part of that is because we can see what you're doing. And if you make a small mistake, but you had the process right about how you got there, I mean, that is, in my opinion, pretty much almost as good. Now, other opinions vary. I mean, that's why we have a panel of interviewers. You get a wide range of opinions about the issue. And we do take note of things like that. But from my perspective, I really care more to see if the approach, I mean, if it's the right approach, rather than whether they remembered to add a semicolon there at the end of that line or something.
Yeah, just to put in there, the approach and the way somebody's doing it is even more important on a phone interview than it is in many ways, than in person, just because that's the only thing you have to go on there. If somebody goes silent on a phone interview for 5 minutes thinking, that tells me nothing. That I can't get anything from that as an interviewer.
Right, absolutely. Cool. So we've got we have a bunch of questions that are coming through the moderator, but I just we're about the halfway point, and would just like to remind anybody out there that's chiming in late that you are joining the Google Hangout on the air about acing the technical interview. And we're about halfway through, and we're going to try and get through a bunch more questions. The one, actually, it's funny you mentioned the phone. We actually have a question for Marion in France, so we're getting all international here. Can some technical interviews happen over the phone? If so, how would that go? Have you guys done a lot of phone interviews? How do they go? I mean, I know my opinion of the phone, but,
Well, so I probably do more phone interviews than I do actual interviews. I have almost a phone interview a week, actually.
Nice.
What I'm doing? Yeah.
Do you want more?
Do I want more?
Teasing.
I'm doing okay. Thank you. So yes, to answer Mary's question, phone interviews definitely happen. And I personally prefer the in-person ones, but with the phone interview, it's very similar. You're going to be asked technical questions. And you actually, very similar to when you are in person and might have to write something on a whiteboard. We use a Google Doc in order to simulate a whiteboard, and so candidates will be asked to type something in, and that's how we see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a standard process at this point. I can just give a couple of tips with respect to the phone interview versus doing it in person.
Please do.
A subtle difference between the way these things work because of the process involved. Rachel mentioned that don't go silent. That it's tough to tell whether you disconnected or whether you just don't know what's going on. But I think that the phone screen is typically the first interview you're going to wind up getting with Google unless you're doing an on-campus interview at a university. And I think that they require a little bit of support from the candidate on the other side of the phone as well. I think that on our side we try to be more engaging so that we can keep contact and make sure things are going. And I feel like having a reciprocation of this from the candidate is a little bit more verbose than they would normally be, that they make sure to speak more clearly as opposed to kind of mumbling to themselves, that sort of thing, where you might do it on the whiteboard. Simply because the audio quality over the phone generally isn't as good, and a lot of people will put you on speakerphone on a cell phone, which compounds the problem. So, I mean, they're the same interview, basically. I ask the same questions whether it's in person or over the phone. I mean, aside from the mechanism, I don't see that much of a difference.
Now, I think a lot of candidates and a lot of people listening to this conversation have probably never had to use a Google Doc for a phone interview. And I know we do tons of them, right? Are there any tips on that little tiny piece? Because I know that having those kinds of things go off the rails in an interview can be really stressful. And is there anything you guys can think of, for that guy or that gal who's got a phone interview next week to make sure that Google Docs
I would love to jump in here. And this would make the interviewer so happy. Run through your whole setup with a friend. Have your friend jump on the phone, in another room even, and be on the Google Doc and ask you some questions and let you know, is your connection clear? Can they understand the things you are saying? Can they see what you're typing, at a reasonable rate of speed so your internet connection is, up to par? Run through the entire scenario. Have your friend ask you a question or two, and so that you can see, like, oh, wow, you were silent for 5 minutes there. Your friend can tell you that, and you may not even notice because, if you were standing there at a whiteboard, you would just be thinking, and it would be clear to your interviewer that you were thinking.
Right.
But yeah, it's very different. So yeah, please run through it. Just 5 minutes is all it takes, really.
Eddie, I think you just said everything you needed to say. That was awesome. Too funny. Okay, so we have another question from Arthur up in Waterloo. And it's actually, we've kicked around it a little bit, but I think it's a good question. Is, he asks, given limited prep time, would it make sense to concentrate more on programming and algorithm design skills over CS theory and specific language, and he put quote, quote, trivia. And now I'm going to say yes, and let you guys expand on that.
Yeah. I think I'll start with this one first. I have no interest in language trivia per se. I really don't. If I look at it, I know that there are tons of people who know more about the languages I use every day than I do. But I'm able to do my job, and I'm very effective at it. I really do care quite a bit more about your understanding of algorithms and data structures and ability to actualize those in code than about whether you can draw finite automata on the board. And, I really don't need that personally. Rachel?
I would agree. In general, most trivia about a language, I mean, if you were at a real, working in the real world, you could just look that up on the internet. So
you mean Google it?
Sorry? Yeah, exactly. You could Google it.
Second.
And so I don't consider that a very useful skill per se. I mean, if needed, I can, let me Google that for you. But the algorithms are something that you're going to use every day during your job. And so that I totally focus more on algorithms than I do about trivia. I don't even know if I've ever asked a trivia question.
Yeah, and on top of
Go
that,
ahead now.
it never comes to a point where, oh man, I wish I knew what this library was. Oh, I know there's this one thing that I could use in this language. My general response is, just assume you have it and describe to me how it works. And then they go ahead and they keep going with the coding question. Mm-hmm. I mean, oftentimes they'll be using some language, and it's like, oh, I need to have this particular string parsing function or something, or I need to have this hash table representation, something or other. It's this hash function thing I can use. Like, okay, fine, just imagine that it exists in that.
Right. Cool. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes left in our Hangout in the Airtime about technical interview prep. We've actually still got tons of questions coming in, which is awesome. I like this one, not because it's from New Hampshire like I am, but I'm going to be totally shameless and say it's because it's from New Hampshire. And the question's from Section 311, whoever that is. Welcome. And it's, do technical interviewers often test candidates for specific technical knowledge, for general technical problem-solving skills, or for grace under pressure when tackling problems? And then he says, or is it all of these? Rachel, you had a big smile and smirk there.
Well, it's quite the comprehensive question.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
I mean, I think it's a little bit of all of those. As I mentioned before, I mean, we're looking for somebody who's comfortable answering technical questions. We're looking for somebody who's, got logical thought process or at least creative thought processes that's going to be able to answer the, questions to some extent. I forget what the other ones you listed there were.
Grace under pressure.
Yeah. That I would say is the relaxed part, that, you're not on edge.
I really look at that part of it as my job. So when I'm meeting a candidate, I'm going to get you comfortable. I'm going to get you in a place where you're ready to roll when Eddie and Rachel come in and start talking about crazy algorithms, right? So I'm going to ask you if you'd like a drink, if you need to take a biology break, whatever it is you need to get relaxed, get settled down, and then be ready to roll. So I really look at part of this is my job is to sort of set the emotional state so then that you guys can always have a really good technical conversation.
Yeah, and when I look at it, I mean, I feel like I try to target my questions to things that pretty much any candidate should know. I don't try to go off on esoteric details. If I see something on their resume that sounds interesting, like my normal first question, and in an attempt to kind of calm things down as well, I'll look at the resume and it's like, can you describe your technical contributions to this project? And then basically it's interesting the types of things they talk about. I'm looking more about and when they calm down, can they explain themselves clearly when they're describing something that they should know because they worked on it. And then beyond that, there's standard, general questions. I don't expect. I try not to cater them. But I have this kind of knack that if someone says they're a graph theorist, I'll ask them a graphing algorithm question to see if they really meant it. So they're not hard, but I mean you have to have it. Rachel's actually familiar with this one. So when I asked her during our training. But anyway, it's a. But in general, I mean, I look just for the exceptional candidates by what they provide beyond my question. The question itself is fairly simple, but there are subtleties in the designs, there are subtleties in the data structures and algorithm choices. And the strongest candidates, I mean, the rock stars that you hear about or whatever, that they're the ones who will go beyond what I asked and explain why they chose this, and that there were these 3 other competing alternatives, but that you would use case A for this type of data type, and case B for this type of data type, and case C if you were dealing with a massively distributed system that had to scale. I mean, something like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. One caveat I would add to that is there's a high likelihood that you will be asked to code up something. So if you say that you code in C or C++, but you actually only code in Java, it's not going to go well. So just be honest.
No, it's funny. We had a question from Elena that was, what languages can I use during the interview? And Eddie and I were talking about earlier, which you can use any language you want. Just make sure that it's the language you've said that you can use.
Yeah.
But we'd love, I mean, I guess that's sort of what you're saying, Rachel, is,
Well, when we are assigned interviews, we are assigned based on what languages that we're familiar with. So because I mean, the way memory is handled is going to be different in C versus Java. And so if we're asking a question that's relating to that, you may have somebody who's an expert in C versus somebody who's an expert in Java. And if you haven't been fully honest about what language you prefer to code in, it's only going to hurt you as an interviewee rather than affect us in any way.
Right. No, absolutely. So we have a bunch more questions coming through. I'm going to try and quickly knock off a couple of them because they're sort of more HR procedural, I think. So I'm going to knock these ones off real quick. And then just to sort of wrap up our time together during this Hangout on the Air, I thought maybe we could just get sort of, if you guys had one magic tip. So why don't you guys think about that, and I'll just knock off these couple of quick questions, and I'll sync right back to you. So we've got one question is, how many rounds of interviews can one expect? I think that it varies a little bit. Generally speaking, when you're interviewing with a place like Google, you meet with about 5 people. It might all be in one day. It might be broken over 2 days. It really can vary a little bit, but typically speaking, you'll talk to 4 or 5 people through the course of an interview. And then the other question we got from AW in the UK, again, keeping ourselves international after going to New Hampshire, was, how technical is an initial phone interview for a technical internship likely to be? And I actually think that's kind of a trick question, because your initial phone interview is probably going to be with a recruiter. And it'll probably not be super technical. It'll be more about, where do you want to work, what kinds of stuff do you like to do, sort of laying the groundwork for that second phone interview, which will then be someone like Rachel or Eddie that's going to basically ask you the same question they would as in person. So a very technical question the first time you speak to an engineer. Would that jive with you guys' experiences? Awesome. All right, so we've got about a minute left here. Eddie, one tip that you would give to people for technical interviews, besides wear a Razorback jersey?
Sadly, no. My one tip, I think, is to be nice. It's amazing. We want you to succeed, and being polite and friendly and sociable goes a long way towards that. And quite frankly, culture fit is one of those things that we look for, and we don't like working with jerks and arrogant people.
Rachel?
That's a good one. I think my one tip, we already touched on speaking when during phone interviews and that sort of thing, but I can't reinforce that enough, how that's the best thing you can do, is just explain where you're going with the problem and explain your thought process, and just the interviewer is there to help you. They want, like Eddie said, we want you to succeed, and the only way we can do that is if we know what you're thinking. So just talk. That's my tip. Talk.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I really appreciate you guys being on here today. These are kind of fun. They're still pretty new. I'm not used to being a game show host over here. But I want to just double down and stress that communication point of emphasis, and that it's really key to everything that we've talked about. I mean, you can be as technical as can be if you can't articulate it through the Google Doc or on the phone. All of those things, it's just so critical to make sure you're communicating good, bad, and ugly, right? I'm stuck, help. I know this is cold. Let me show you. Communicate, communicate, communicate. So and with that, we are at 1 minute late, so I would just like to thank you guys again for coming on and doing this chat about technical interviews through our Hanging on the Air. And next week we'll be doing more, so anybody listening that's interested can come back next week and catch a few more. And I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Go Hogs.